Part 9 of the Dragon Scourge. Chapter 7. Bitter Words. Princess, what is to become of Shadow and your brother? Creola's sky-blue eyes grew sad, and she turned to glance over at her most loyal knight, then at her brother, who were both still chained up. Shadow's head hung low, and his eyes gazed into the dust in defeat. "Shadow," she began. Upon hearing the princess's voice speak his name, the knight lifted his head. "I've known you since I was a child. I still remember when you could speak, before you lost your voice protecting me." Creola bit her lower lip, and tears began to run down her face. "But you can't protect me anymore. I release you from your service." The great man of war didn't blink. His eyes slowly pulled away and locked onto the savage young warrior. The clove felt a chill run down his spine. Unable to hold the warrior's intense gaze, the clove dropped his eyes and stared at the dirt as the knight was unchained and limped back to the stable to saddle his horse. Creola then turned to her brother. "Matthias," she began. But the young prince was not so stoic. Tears ran down his face. "No, this isn't right," he protested. "I won't let you do this." "Brother, you are banished." The prince's eyes widened in shock, and he shook his head in disbelief. "But you're my sister!" he exclaimed. The princess continued, "You are hereby banished for treason and conspiracy against the crown." The clove looked up and glanced at the knights, who looked equally as surprised. "What? You can't!" "By what authority?" Matthias stammered in denial. With tears running down her face, Creola turned away from her brother and pointed toward the stables. "You are being a selfish little boy. Take your horse and get out of my sight. I don't want to see you again," she commanded. Speechless, Matthias stumbled back as if he had been punched in the chest. Tears flooded down his face as he turned and fled into the stables and rode off. "Princess," Rukrith began, but Creola covered her face and put her hand up as she walked away, indicating that she did not wish to be troubled. Only moments later, however, she fainted and collapsed into the mud. "Princess!" Rukrith shouted in horror as he rushed to her aid. "Send for her maidens. Help her to the carriage," he commanded. Grun glanced coldly over to the clove. "Where to now, nameless one?" he demanded sourly. The clove silently gestured toward the west gate, and Grun signaled the troops to follow. "Ha! What did you think you were riding with us, peasant?" Grun asked as he saddled his horse. The clove smirked. "I was thinking of getting a boat instead." Grun blinked, not entirely getting the humor. "What?" The clove's sharp yellow eyes glinted with mischief. "The orc lives in a bog. You can swim if you like," he offered. "You can swim with all that armor, right?" Grun frowned. "How far is this bog?" he demanded. The clove shrugged. "Probably just a mile or so," he announced. Grun's eyes narrowed, and he glared at the clove from his mighty white war horse. "Probably? What do you mean?" "Well, I can smell it from here," the clove explained. The Green Knight suddenly pulled back on his horse's reins and threw his fist into the air. "Halt! Halt! Back into the inn!" There were shouts of protest and grumblings within the ranks, and Rukuth came riding up to the front.
"What is the delay? Why are we stopping? We haven't even gotten to the gate yet," he growled.
"The Oracle lives in a bog," Gruen explained. "We can't take the horses in there." Rukuth whirled around and glared at Leclove.
"So when were you going to tell us this?" he demanded.
Leclove grinned sheepishly and shrugged, very much enjoying the confusion on everyone's faces as they scrambled about to unpack their supplies. After unpacking and repacking again, they set out once more. The knights and the soldiers were soon complaining of the growing foul odor of sulfur and methane. The earth beneath their feet turned to slick mire and wet moss. As Leclove predicted, the bog wasn't far at all. The road led toward a small, run-down shack in the edge of the swamp. A lengthy, withered man sat cross-legged at the dock, smoking his pipe as he watched a small barrel tied to a wooden beam as it bobbed in the murky black water. Leclove stepped out onto the rickety old dock and hailed the man.
"A good day to you, friend. What sort of fish are in these parts?" he asked cheerfully.
The old man took a deep drag of his pipe, and in such a low, hoarse voice it was barely above a whisper breathed,
"Gators,"
sounding very much as if he had just swallowed a bag full of gravel. Leclove nodded as he glanced over the edge, oblivious to the fact that gators were not fish.
"I can only take 4 of you to see the Oracle," the man announced,
still not bothering to turn around. Gruen pushed Leclove aside and demanded,
"Who told you about our business here?"
The old man slowly fixed his straw hat and rose to his feet.
"People only come to the bog for one reason," he rasped, turning his back to the knight as he slowly hobbled over to his floating shack. "I would tread lightly, boy," he warned. "These here boards are older and far less patient than I am." "Don't you turn your back on me! I am speaking to you, peasant!"
Crunch. The knight froze in his tracks as he felt the board splinter under his feet. He watched in disbelief as Leclove walked past on the rickety boards.
"Gators, really? What sort of bait do you use for them?" he asked.
The old man glanced at Leclove and took another puff.
"Usually chickens, but they'll eat just about anybody," he replied, eyeing Gruen coldly.
The knight backed away slowly, allowing Leclove to do the talking.
"Chickens? Whole chickens?"
The old man clacked his discolored, crooked teeth on the stem of his pipe, studying Leclove carefully.
"Sometimes,"
he replied, taking another slow drag from his pipe. Leclove's eyes grew wide, and he ran his hand along his unruly black hair. He had never heard of a fish so large that it could swallow a whole chicken.
"I've never fished with a chicken before," he marveled. "What is your name?" the old man asked.
Leclove's smile fell, and his eyes grew troubled as he took in a deep breath. "I don't know, sir. I was told the Oracle could tell me," he answered truthfully. The old man raised his scruffy gray eyebrows and studied Leclove harder.
"Would you take some good advice from an old ferryman, son?" the man asked.
Leclove nodded again and waited respectfully for the man to speak.
"Sometimes things are best left forgotten. Have you ever thought this may be a blessing rather than a curse? Many wish they could forget the past, but they cannot. Go, make a new name for yourself, son. You have been given a fresh slate. Live your life without regret. Go back.
The Clove lowered his head, and then looked back up at the old man. How much is the toll, sir? He asked somberly. The boatman looked at the Clove and let out a ragged breath.
You're young. Go find a woman. Settle down. There is nothing out in the gloom but death.
He made a sweeping gesture toward the twisted trees and the black, murky waters of the dreadful bog. But the Clove would not be swayed. How much is the toll, boatman? He asked, firmer this time. The old ferryman lowered his head and let out a regretful sigh.
2 coppers each, 1 for the ferry across, and 1 for the ferry back,
he said at last, and he slowly rose up to untie the wooden John boat. Clove nodded and walked back to where the knights were waiting.
What did he say? Gruen snapped impatiently.
It'll be 8 pennies for a round trip, the Clove announced grimly, as he watched the strange old man paddle toward the edge of the mossy bank. Rooketh smirked as he strolled up to the boatman with an arrogant swagger.
That should be more than sufficient, he announced, tossing him 1 gold piece. What is this? The old man asked.
Rooketh smirked.
That, sir, is a solid gold coin, he declared.
The old man tossed it back to the Red Knight's feet.
2 coppers each, 1 for the ferry across, and 1 for the ferry back, he rasped.
Rooketh picked up the gold coin and held it for the boatman to take.
Yes, we know, but this coin is worth 100 pennies, which you may keep for your trouble. You're making more money, he explained impatiently.
But the boatman merely took another draw at his pipe and blew a ring of smoke at the gold piece on the knight's hand. Never once raising his voice, the ferryman repeated in a thick, hoarse monotone,
1 copper for the ferry across, 1 copper for the ferry back.
Rooketh shook his head and tried to keep smiling. Listen, I only have silver or gold, he explained. But the boatman held up a frail, bony finger.
1 for the ferry across, and 1 for the ferry back.
Gruen pulled his comrade aside.
The man's a lunatic. Just give him what he wants, he said in a low voice.
The Clove quickly stepped in and snatched the gold coin from Rooketh's hand.
Hey, what are you doing?
Rooketh exclaimed, but the Clove merely stalked off toward the soldiers, who grew silent and eyed the young warrior disdainfully. Anybody have 8 pennies?
We could borrow for the boatman, the Clove asked.
The soldiers turned away and began talking amongst themselves, ignoring him. The Clove walked over and tapped a tall soldier on the shoulder, and he turned around to face him.
8 pennies for a gold piece, the Clove announced, holding the shiny yellow coin up in the air.
The soldier blinked and stared at the Clove in disbelief.
Eight pennies for a gold crown, he exclaimed.
The Clove held out the coin. Drinks are on me, he said, grinning. The soldier quickly searched through his pockets and found his small money pouch.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, he said,
handing him the coppers in exchange for the gold coin. The Clove nodded and plodded back to the boatman. All right, 8 pennies, he announced, holding out his hand. But the old man merely stared at him from the boat and blew a thin cloud of smoke at him.
1 for the ferry across, One for the ferry back, he repeated.
What's wrong now? Rooketh growled impatiently. The Clove turned around and looked at the knights. Oh, he said, understanding. Who is coming and who is staying? The boatman eyed the knights quietly and let out another cloud of smoke rush out of his nostrils.
Tell your friends to take off their boots and armor. I just patched up all the leaks in the floor.
Ah, yes, Elkhorn announced quickly. Well, don't worry, good sirs. I'll be here watching all of your things. I mean, when you come back, of course. Shade, the Orange Knight, agreed quickly. Me too, he said, putting his hand on Preston, who was next to him. Well, let me tell you, Sir Preston, I envy you, sir. And you, Groon and Rooketh. But if by chance, if something does go wrong, is there anything like a note or a letter that you would have me deliver to your family? He offered, realizing that he had just been volunteered. Preston's eyes went wide and he stared at his comrades, at a loss for words. Rooketh stepped in, laughing heartily. Very funny, Shade. Don't listen to him, Preston. He's only joking. You know how he likes to joke. Let's go. Help me out with this, he growled impatiently as he began loosening his armor. Ah, yes. Look, Preston let out an uneasy laugh and began taking off his boots. Leading the way, Rooketh walked over to the boatman and held out his hand. 1 copper for the ferry across and 1 copper for the ferry back, he announced. The old man gave a slight nod and held out a small wooden box with a slot on top. Rooketh smiled weakly and Rooketh grimaced as he carefully boarded the flat-bottomed swamp boat. The others quickly followed. With each penny, the boatman repeated the same words. However, as the Clove went to put his coin into the slot, the boatman moved the box away and clacked the stem of his pipe on his twisted teeth.
Can you hear them? He asked,
conspiratorially. The Clove frowned. Hear what?
The old man looked out into the black murk of the great bog and took a deep breath, and then turned to look at the young warrior. Their screams, he said, breathing out the cloud of smoke in a low conspiratorial whisper.
The Clove clenched his teeth and thrust out his coin. 1 copper for the ferry across, he declared in a firm voice. And magic, the Clove looked at the boatman in surprise as a penny rattled in the box.
1 copper for the ferry back.
But when the Clove leaned forward to place the second coin into the box, the narrow slot vanished, and the penny in his hand struck the top of the wooden box with a metallic thunk. Still holding the penny, the Clove looked at the boatman questioningly, but the old man merely raised his bushy eyebrows and settled back, sucking on his pipe. The Clove looked down on the flat, gray, weathered box, but the coin slot was gone, vanished as if it had never been. Smoke swirled beneath the brim of the boatman's straw hat as he set the box beneath his seat. The pipe clacked in his mouth as he placed his gnarled hands onto the oars and looked up at the Clove inquisitively, waiting to see if he would get in. Rooketh hesitantly leaned forward and asked, Is there anything wrong? Clove gripped the copper in his hand tightly. No, he said at last, and stepped into the boat. Chapter 8. 1 coin for the ferry across. You have been listening to The Dragon Scourge by M.R.R. Lopez. If you would like to support the channel, please tell your friends, and the book is available on Amazon. And, if you leave a positive review, I would love to send a signed paperback to you as a thank you, and have a wonderful day. Or look for Part 10, Chapter 8 of The Dragon Scourge coming soon.